They told me I was useless, not in a whisper or a passing comment, but in the middle of the family dinner table in Lyon with everyone watching. My father looked me straight in the eye and said those words that would either destroy me or change everything. I remember the sound of the fork hitting the plate, the way my mother looked away, and how my younger sister suddenly became very interested in the napkin on her lap. It was the moment that defined my entire life, the moment when I had to choose between believing what they said or proving them all wrong. I was 22 years old, sitting in my childhood home in the heart of France, without a university degree, without a prestigious job title, without anything that society had convinced me I needed to matter. But what happened next would become a story I never imagined I would tell, a story that would transform not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me in ways I could never have anticipated. My name is Thomas, and this is the story of how being called useless became the greatest gift I ever received. Growing up in a middle-class family in Lyon, everything was already mapped out for me. My father was a successful corporate lawyer, my mother was a university professor, and my sister was the golden child, always getting straight A's, always doing everything right. There was an unspoken expectation that I would follow the same path, that I would study something prestigious, get a degree from a good university, work my way up the ladder, and become someone important. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling suffocated by this predetermined future. I loved working with my hands, creating things, understanding how things actually worked in the real world rather than in theory. In high school, while my classmates were preparing for university entrance exams, I was watching YouTube videos about carpentry, about small business entrepreneurship, about people who had built their own paths without following the traditional route. My parents noticed this shift, and they didn't like it. They saw it as laziness, as a lack of ambition, as a rejection of everything they had worked so hard to build for our family. When I was 17, I told them I wasn't going to university. The conversation lasted 3 hours, and it was one of the most painful experiences of my life. My father argued about job security, about respect, about the fact that without a degree, I would never be taken seriously. My mother cried, which somehow felt worse than the arguments. She kept saying things like, "But what will you tell people? And don't you want more for yourself?" My sister watched from the corner with a mixture of pity and judgment in her eyes. But I was stubborn, maybe even selfish, and I refused to change my mind. I applied to a vocational training program in carpentry and furniture design instead. I told myself I was making a brave choice, that I was going against the grain, that I was being authentic. My parents tolerated my decision, but they never really supported it. That tolerance slowly turned into disappointment, and disappointment eventually transformed into resentment. For the next 5 years, I worked as an apprentice under a master craftsman named Claude, an old man in his 70s who had been building beautiful furniture for decades. It was honest work, physically demanding, but incredibly fulfilling. Claude taught me not just the technical skills of woodworking, but something much deeper about patience, precision, and the importance of putting your entire soul into what you create. I was making decent money, enough to rent a small apartment, enough to feel independent. But I was also completely isolated from my family. My father stopped asking about my work. My mother would change the subject whenever I tried to talk about my projects. Family dinners became awkward and tense, filled with long silences. And then came that dinner in my family's home, the one I mentioned at the beginning, when everything finally exploded. My father had too much wine, and he said what everyone had been thinking for years. He told me I was wasting my potential, that I was useless without credentials, that I had thrown away my life for a hobby. The words hit like a physical blow, but they also ignited something inside me, something I didn't know I had anymore. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I left my parents' house that evening without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove back to my small apartment in the industrial district of Lyon, where my workshop occupied the ground floor. The walls were lined with tools I had collected over the years, and unfinished pieces of furniture sat in various stages of completion. The place smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and it had always been my sanctuary. But that night, sitting among all those projects, I felt lost. My father's words kept echoing in my head, Not because I believed them entirely, but because I realized I had never actually tried to build something bigger than just surviving day by day. I was creating beautiful pieces for wealthy clients, but I wasn't making any real impact. I wasn't changing anything. I wasn't proving that my path was valuable. That's when the real journey began, though I didn't know it would lead me to places I never expected to find. Over the next few months, I started working on a project that would consume every waking moment of my life. I decided to create a line of sustainable furniture, specifically designed for people living in poverty or difficult circumstances. The idea came to me after I met a woman named Sophie at the local community center where I volunteered occasionally. She was living in temporary housing with her 2 children, and she told me that she had to leave everything behind when she escaped a domestic violence situation. She had no furniture, no money for furniture, and the shelters could only provide the bare minimum. That conversation haunted me. I realized that my skills could be used for more than just creating luxury items for people who didn't really need them. I could create functional, beautiful pieces that would actually improve people's lives in meaningful ways. I spent months designing modular furniture that could be assembled quickly, transported easily, and cost almost nothing to produce because I sourced recycled and reclaimed materials from construction sites and factories. Claude, my old mentor, thought I was crazy at first. He was used to working with expensive woods and premium materials, and here I was asking him to help me build furniture from discarded pallets and salvaged door frames. But something about my passion convinced him, or maybe he saw in me the same fire he had felt when he was young and idealistic. He agreed to help me, and together we started producing these pieces in his workshop after hours. We didn't charge money for them initially. We just wanted to see if the concept would work. We gave the first batch to the community center, and Sophie helped us distribute them to families in need. I will never forget the look on people's faces when they received a bed for their children, or a shelf where they could organize their lives, or a small desk where their kids could do homework. These were people who had been told their entire lives that they weren't worth investing in, that they didn't matter, that society had moved on without them. And suddenly, through something as simple as a piece of furniture, they were receiving a message that said, "You are worth something, you deserve dignity, you deserve to have a space that feels like home." My parents didn't know about any of this for a long time. I wasn't trying to hide it from them deliberately, but the truth is they had stopped asking about my life. My mother occasionally sent text messages asking if I was eating well, and my father would remind me every few months that I was wasting my potential and should consider going back to school, but there was no real conversation happening between us. The isolation was complete, but it was also somehow liberating. I was free to build something without their judgment, without their expectations, without their fear of what people would think. But freedom and emptiness often feel the same when you're going through it, and there were nights when I wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I was just being stubborn and destructive, if maybe my father was right after all. Those were the nights when I questioned everything, when fear crept in and whispered that I had made a terrible mistake by not listening to them, that I was indeed useless without the validation that comes from credentials and social status. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday morning in March. I received a call from a journalist named Isabelle, who worked for a prominent French newspaper. She had heard about the furniture project through someone at the community center, and she wanted to write a story about what I was doing. At first, I was nervous. I thought the attention would be embarrassing, that it would feel like I was trying to brag or make myself look good. But Isabelle was persistent and kind, and she explained that her goal was to highlight the reality of poverty and homelessness in France, and to show how ordinary people could make a difference. I agreed to let her interview me and photograph the workshop, thinking nothing would really come of it. I was wrong. The article was published in the newspaper's Sunday edition, but it didn't stay in the newspaper. Someone shared it online, and then someone else shared it again, and within a few days, it had been seen by hundreds of thousands of people. The comments were overwhelming. People were moved by the story, not because it was heroic or exceptional, but because it was real. It showed that one person without a degree, without a prestigious job title, could still create something meaningful. What happened next was absolutely unexpected. Companies started contacting me, wanting to partner with the project. Construction companies offered to donate materials, furniture brands wanted to collaborate. Universities, ironically enough, started reaching out asking if I would speak to their students about entrepreneurship and social impact. Media outlets requested interviews. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow the project for a year. I was completely overwhelmed, not in a positive way at first, but in a way that made me question whether this was still the same pure, simple project I had started, or if it was becoming something else entirely. But I also realized something crucial. This wasn't about me anymore. The project had grown beyond my own need to prove something to my family or to society. It had become a movement, a real opportunity to help thousands of people transform their living situations and their sense of self-worth. My father called me on a Thursday evening. This was significant because he hadn't called me in over 2 years. We had only communicated through occasional text messages or awkward family gatherings where we barely spoke to each other. He asked me if we could have dinner, just the two of us. I remember my heart racing when he said this. I didn't know if he was going to apologize or if he was going to continue the fight we had been having since that terrible dinner years ago. We met at a small restaurant near the old town in Lyon, a place where my parents used to take us when we were children. My father looked older than I remembered. His hair was completely grey now and there were deep lines around his eyes. He ordered wine, and for a long time, we sat in silence. Then he did something I never expected him to do. He started crying. Not subtle tears, but actual sobbing, which was completely out of character for someone as controlled and composed as my father usually was. He told me that he had read the article, that he had followed the story as it spread online, and that he had watched one of the interviews I had done with a television program. He said that watching me talk about the furniture project, about the families I was helping, about the meaning I had found in the work, had made him realize something fundamental about his own life. He said that he had spent 40 years chasing credentials, status, and respect, and that he had built his entire identity around being a successful lawyer, a person with authority and power. But after seeing what I had created, after understanding the impact I was having on people's lives, he realized that he had never actually helped anyone in any meaningful way. His work was important in the abstract sense, but it never touched anyone's heart, never changed anyone's life in the way my project had changed the lives of thousands of people. He had been so focused on proving that I was wrong to reject the traditional path that he had never stopped to consider whether the traditional path he had chosen was actually fulfilling or if it was just empty achievement. And in that moment, in that small restaurant in Lyon, my father finally understood why I had walked away from his world. It wasn't because I was lazy or useless or unambitious. It was because I needed to find meaning in a different way, through my own path, through creating something that mattered not because it looked impressive on paper, but because it actually made a difference in people's lives. We talked for hours that night, and for the first time in years my father actually listened to me. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to convince me that I should have done things differently, didn't judge my choices. He simply listened, and I talked about my journey, about the struggle of going against my family's expectations, about the loneliness of building something unconventional, about the fear I had felt when people questioned my worth because I didn't have a degree. I also talked about the joy I felt now, the sense of purpose, the knowledge that I was using my skills not for profit but for impact. And my father, this man who had spent his entire life climbing a corporate ladder, admitted that he was jealous of me. He said those exact words, "I am jealous of you, Thomas, because you have found something that I spent my whole life looking for, but never found." That confession broke something open in both of us. We both cried that night, not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition, tears of finally seeing each other clearly after years of misunderstanding. When I went home that evening, I called my mother. I had been too hurt to maintain much of a relationship with her after the dinner incident, but I realized that she had also been suffering in her own way, caught between my father's judgment and her own concern for me. She answered the phone almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me to call, and when I told her I was coming home for dinner the following Sunday, I could hear the emotion in her voice. That dinner was different from the previous ones. My mother had made all my favorite dishes, and my sister actually seemed happy to see me. We didn't pretend that the previous years hadn't happened, that the pain and misunderstanding hadn't occurred, but we also didn't dwell on it. We moved forward. My father told my mother about our conversation, and my mother told me that she had always believed in me, that she had only pushed me toward university because she was afraid I would regret it later, but that she could see now that I had never regretted any of my choices. The real turning point came about a year later. The furniture project had grown so significantly that I needed to formalize it as an organization. I created a non-profit with the goal of scaling the impact, of training other craftspeople, of establishing workshops in other cities across France. I was doing interviews, giving presentations, working 16-hour days, but it was no longer because I was trying to prove something to my family or to society. I was doing it because it genuinely mattered to me. And when my father attended the opening ceremony of the second workshop location in Paris, I saw something in his face that I had never seen before. It was pride, but not the kind of pride that comes from your child accomplishing something impressive on paper. It was the pride of seeing someone you love living authentically, pursuing work that feeds their soul, making a real difference in the world. He stood next to me in front of the new workshop, surrounded by people who had benefited from the project, and he put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "I was so wrong about you, Thomas. I am so sorry it took me this long to see it." That moment healed something between us that I thought might be broken forever. My mother started volunteering with the organization, helping organize community events and connecting with families who needed support. My sister, who had always followed the traditional path and was now working as a consultant in a major firm, began donating part of her salary to the non-profit and even helped with the business strategy. The family that had been fractured by my choice to walk away from convention was now united in a different way, around something that actually mattered. We weren't united by achievement or status or credentials anymore. We were united by a shared belief that life should be about more than just climbing ladders and accumulating accolades. We were united by the knowledge that the most meaningful things we can do are often the ones that no one has told us we should do, the ones that society doesn't validate, the ones that we have to believe in despite the fear and the doubt. Looking back at that moment when my father called me useless, I can now see it as perhaps the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Not because the words were true, but because they were so obviously wrong that they forced me to examine what I actually believed about myself. If I had simply accepted his definition of my worth, if I had allowed his opinion to become my truth, I never would have discovered what I was actually capable of creating. I never would have helped the thousands of families who now have dignity and comfort in their homes. I never would have proven that value and worth are not determined by diplomas or job titles or social status, but by the impact you have on other people's lives and the authenticity with which you live. The world tells us from a very young age that there is only one path to success, one way to matter, one formula for a meaningful life. And for those of us who don't fit that formula, it can feel like we are failing, like we are broken, like we are less than. But what I have learned is that the people who change the world, who create real meaning and real impact, are often the ones who had the courage to reject the conventional path and build their own. I want to tell you something that I believe with my whole heart, and I say this not just for you but for everyone who might be watching this and feeling lost or questioning their worth because they don't fit the mold that society has prepared for them. Your value is not determined by what anyone else thinks you should be. Your potential is not limited by anyone else's expectations. The things that make you different, the dreams that seem impractical to other people, the passion you feel for something that doesn't look impressive on a resume, these are not signs of failure. These are signs that you are meant to build something different, something that only you can build because of who you are and what you care about. It took me years to understand that, and it cost me years of isolation and pain, but it was worth it. Every moment of doubt, every family dinner filled with tension, every moment when I questioned whether I was making a terrible mistake, it was all worth it because it led me to a life that actually means something. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are failing because you are not following the path that everyone expects you to follow, I want you to know that you are not alone. There are thousands of people out there who have walked unconventional paths, who have been told they were useless or unrealistic or throwing away their potential, and who have created something beautiful and meaningful as a result. The world needs people who are willing to think differently, to do things differently, to create solutions that don't fit into the traditional categories. The world needs your unique perspective, your specific skills, your particular passion, even if no one has told you that yet. I am living proof that you don't need a college degree to matter, that you don't need impressive credentials to make an impact, that you don't need to follow someone else's definition of success to have a meaningful life. You just need courage and persistence and faith in yourself, even when no one else believes in you yet. I want to end by telling you that my father is now one of my greatest supporters, not because I eventually did what he wanted me to do, but because he finally understood why I did what I needed to do. My mother volunteers with me every week. My sister has become an incredible advocate for the project. But most importantly, I have built a life where I wake up every morning knowing that what I am doing matters, that I am using my gifts in service of something bigger than myself, that I am proving every single day that there are multiple ways to be valuable, multiple ways to contribute, multiple ways to matter. I am no longer the person who was called useless. I am the person who was called to something different, and that calling has transformed everything. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully. What are you being called to? What passion, what dream, what vision keeps you awake at night, even though society might tell you it is not practical or impressive or valid? And if you know someone who has overcome similar challenges, someone who has walked their own path despite the pressure to conform, I want to hear their story. I want to share their story with others who need to know that they are not alone, that there is a whole community of people who understood that being different is not the same as being useless. Leave a comment below and tell me your story, or tell me about someone whose journey inspires you. Tell me about the moment when you realized that you didn't have to follow someone else's definition of success. Tell me what you are building, what you are creating, what you are becoming despite the fear and the doubt. This channel is a space for all of us who have been told we were not enough, who have been judged for our unconventional choices, who have decided to believe in ourselves anyway. Your story matters. Your journey matters. And I cannot wait to hear what you have built.